Hello everyone, I am the Enforcer, and today I'm coming with you to talk about the Day 59 news. Let me make sure to change that up here real quick, just so that way everyone who clicks on the stream can see that it is Day 59, but I've decided today not to highlight these markers, because it would be a decent amount of time wasted, because the map still hasn't fixed itself, unfortunately I also haven't had the time to fix it, and make sure that it can update itself, but once it does, it's going to delete all of these markers off the map. So for now, the markers are not going to be colored today, they're just going to be in their original format. But nonetheless, welcome everyone. I hope y'all are ready to hear the news today, as there has been a few major developments that we can see on the horizon, and a couple of interesting things that did happen, of course, today. And so without further ado, let's go through the schedule for tonight. First off, we will start off in Belarus today and cover the news that we've seen near Gomel, which is suggesting that there may be a bit of a change in Russian strategy again. We will then move on down to all of the location unknowns we've gotten today, which we have 14 in total. We will then cover all of the location unknowns, and once we do that, we're going to move on to the Kharkiv and Donbas region. And before we move on to Kharkiv, we're going to answer 3 to 5 questions from the chat. I saw someone in the comments of one of the last streams who said, why do you say you're going to answer 35 questions and then you only answer 3 or 5 of them? And so I put in 3 to 5, and it's 3 to 5, not 35. So with that, we'll then cover the Kharkiv and Donbas news. We will also talk about the situation here and what it's looking like. That's also the reason for the poll at the very beginning of this stream, where I talked about, where I asked y'all, are the Ukrainians going to be able to hang on to the Donbas like they are right now? And it looks like most of you said yes. The remainder of y'all said maybe, and around 11% of y'all said no, they're losing their grip. And we'll go over it today, and we'll see down all 3 avenues which one may be the case. Once we cover all the Kharkiv and Donbas news, we're then going to move on towards Mariupol. But before we get there, we're going to answer another 3 to 5 questions from the chat. We will then cover the Mariupol news, the rest of the Southern Front news, and then that will actually wrap up all the news for today. We actually didn't have any news that came around from the international sector, I guess you could call it, because there just wasn't anything important enough, I believe, to have been covered today internationally. And so without further ado, let's get right into the news. Starting off near Gomel, we've actually seen, according to satellite images, that there is a new Russian camp being formed near the Ukrainian border up there. It is incredibly small, at least as what we can see here in this picture, and all the vehicles were not marked with license plates or marked with invasion markings like a Z or an O or a V. So we know that these troops aren't going to be going directly into Ukraine anytime soon, but we do know that a new camp is being constructed in Belarus. Not exactly sure as to the size, but nonetheless, that is cause for concern, because it may be showing that the Russians are, in fact, getting ready for a second northern offensive, although I do believe that that would be asinine at this point, because you got to think about it. They made it all the way to Kyiv, and if they were really planning on hanging on to the northern front or actually doing anything meaningful there, why in the world would they retreat and lose all of that ground to then have to fight for it all over again and try and reach Kyiv once more? It just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me on, like, the common sense logical reasoning route, and so I don't really think they will be going for that. That may just be some random camp they're setting up for some other purpose, but nonetheless, we don't really have a lot of information about it, but we will try and see how that situation unfolds in the coming days. So with that, we're now going to move on past the northern front, since nothing occurred there and it doesn't exist anymore, and we're going to move on to the location unknowns, which we have actually had a pretty decent amount of today. Starting off, we can see the launch of an Iskander ballistic missile. We have seen these being used a lot by the Russians, and it's very rare that we actually see the rocket launching systems in action. So here's the video of one real quick. Let me unmute it and start it off at the very beginning. As you can see, the Iskander is being launched, and it is setting off towards its destination, most likely a populated city somewhere in a residential area, because today we actually saw some very unfortunate news with the ballistic missiles that the Russians have been firing, and we'll get to that later on. But nonetheless, I don't have high hopes for where this thing is heading. It's probably going to hit, of course, a residential area. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see 3 videos put together to show an entire firefight from a Ukrainian perspective. So I'm going to let y'all see this real quick. It's an actually very interesting video when you watch it, but nonetheless, here it is. Mina. So we can see here the Ukrainians are lining up on the wall. They are now moving down the length of this wall/fence. It's really more of a fence. Cameraman now zipped up the other soldier's backpack. Now we can see the video we saw from yesterday where the guy is firing from the side of the building. And so this video is kind of like an amalgamation of several others, and it's showing the entirety of this firefight as put together by multiple videos of it, instead of just one. So we can see that he's now leaning around the building again and firing. We're going to skip forward past this part because we actually showed this yesterday. We're going to skip forward to the part where the man is no longer firing because we actually didn't see this part of the video the other day. Now we see the Ukrainian with the RPK now setting up somewhere in like a depression in this ground near this house. And it looks like he's now starting to lay down suppressive fire maybe at the Russians. You can see that they're, of course, calm and collected, which is something important to note with all the Ukrainians, is that it seems like they have a better idea of what they're doing as compared to their LPR, DPR, and Chechnyan counterparts. We haven't really seen a lot of footage of the Russian infantry actually fighting themselves outside of Russia Today's videos, and so I can't really comment on how well put together the Russians are, but I can assume it's incredibly poor considering that they abandoned their vehicles at the first sign of resistance or firefights. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see the Ukrainian Uragans firing in the night. These are, of course, the larger MLRS systems of the Ukrainians that are kind of domestically owned. We do know that the United States is sending over their own MLRSs to Ukraine, and those, of course, are much better than the Uragan or anything that the Eastern armies can field. So with that, here's the video.
Батареєва. Визначено кількість снарядів. По москалям. Залпом. Вогонь!
So now you can see that the Uragans are firing. Quite the sight. And with that, that's the end of the video. But of course, I like to show that because first, it was incredibly cool to see from, you know, moving beyond the tactical and strategic perspective of the thing. It's incredible to see. But beyond that, it is good to know that the Ukrainians are fielding a large amount of MLRS batteries and artillery in general against the Russians, and we do know that that's a generally good reason why they're winning this war at this point, due to the ATGM arm of their military and also the artillery side of their military is pretty much winning this battle on the ground for them at this point. But with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see a shoot and scoot. This is probably the best example of a shoot and scoot that we can see. Unfortunately, I will have to mute the video because it does have copyrighted music playing in it. But nonetheless, we can see these two Ukrainians here moving towards the Russians, which you cannot see yet. But the guy in front has an AT-4. This guy is, of course, using an AK-74 most likely. And he's going to run up to a tank and fire on it at pretty much point-blank range and then scoot. So it's literally a shoot and scoot. Nonetheless, we can see him setting up here, aiming at the tank in the distance. We're now waiting for him to fire. And he fired. and we couldn't see the explosion, but we can see that they are scooting right away to make sure that they're not going to be fired at by the Russians, who have just found out that the Ukrainians are nearby and trying to take them out. And so with that, that's the end of that video. It's good to see that the Ukrainians are, of course, doing something intelligent as compared to the Russians sometimes, where they try and shoot and then scoot instead of just shooting and then sitting there like we see in a lot of the Russia Today videos. But then again, that's usually because it's a propaganda video and they don't really have to worry about incoming fire because there's no enemy forces in the area for them to fight anyways. So with that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see a old lady talk about her story from Mariupol. And so without further ado, here's the video. I'm just going to let y'all see it. So I'm going to start it from the very beginning so that way y'all can hear the entire story. It is very unfortunate and sad, but with that, here's the video.
На левом берегу около военкомата. Он вышел с подъезда, его мгновенно расстреляли. Ноги в одну сторону, руки в другую, а его тело бог знает куда закинул. Квартиру мою спалили. Попала бомба, полдома завалилось, 9-этажного, и вся 9-этажка сгорела. Это в Мариуполе, до 17-го микрорайона. Так что это правда, дочечка, что там такое творится. Они собрали с 4 людей, с 4 домов, посчитали. Я говорю, идите по домам. Потом танками начали расстреливать. И вот невестка говорит, через 4 дома, с 4 домов 6 человек осталось живых. Она говорит, я ночью Олежика искала, не могла найти. Бегала по трупам, мама обгоревшая, все. Очнулась у чеченца, говорит, в руках. Он мне дает кусочек хлеба и воды. И говорит, идем, я тебя посажу в машину. И в Новоазовск ее отправили. Там она давала показания в прокуратуре, что это украинский танк раздробил полностью все дома. Так что это правда, дочь. Это чистая правда.
It's an incredibly unfortunate story to hear. We know that there's loads of stories like that come out of Mariupol daily at this point due to the Russian savagery and how brutal they are in fighting this war. They directly kill civilians almost all the time and use underhanded threats and tactics to try and make sure that the Ukrainians, the ones that are under their control, have their arm twisted behind their back far enough that they will tell the story the way the Russians want the story to be told. And it's incredibly unfortunate to hear that this poor lady had to go through that, and that will be something that she lives with for the rest of her life. And so I wish her the best, and I hope that she's now in safety. We know that she is. Apparently she was evacuated from the city of Mariupol, because this is definitely not Mariupol. The condition of the buildings behind her are intact, which is something that does not exist anymore in that city. So with that, we're going to leave that there. We're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see a captured Russian drone. This is an incredibly interesting one, but without further ado, here is the video. It's really neat because it's kind of like the old unpacking videos we used to see a while ago.
Відобрали в дитини літачок. Ті-ті-ті. Це все нашопридатний русський оборонпром. А такого херня на моторчику.
So we can see that the drone is intact inside of its container. They pretty much captured the entire piece intact along with what they carry it with, which is pretty crazy.
Тихо, дивіться, дивіться, кілько тут двигатель включається автоматически. Русский то корабль. Да, айде нахер. Так. А чуєш, піксель, блін, такий. А диви, а у піксель то наш замалювали, бляха. Bayraktar.
And we can hear that guy singing the Bayraktar song, which is pretty funny.
Отсек ОКБ. Так, Сотне вчора був у нас БТР разом з екіпажем, який відправився на концерт до Кобзона.
So now we can see them trying to put it together. Maybe they'll use it, maybe they won't. I'm not entirely sure if that has some kind of tracking system where the Russians will know where it is. I'm not really an expert on how drones work, or specifically Russian ones in general, but with that, we're going to cut this video short because it is just a drone. And I've also been looking at the comments for a bit, and I'm going to go back and explain for a second the video we were just on a second ago. The video where the lady said that that she said that the the Ukrainians have fired onto her building is because the Russians told her to say that. She was pretty much coerced into saying that, although it wasn't the truth. So I think that may have just been because some people couldn't really follow the story too well. It was, of course, text to speech, but nonetheless, that is actually how the story went. And that's why she was very shaken up, because if the Ukrainians had done it, I don't really think she would have been talking about how terrible the Russians were and how they blew apart her son and stuff at the beginning. She was really laying out the story of how all that happened, and then in the end she had to lie to make sure that she could stay alive as well. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can see a firefighter washing a cat. This is a cute little video. I wanted to show it just because it was very sweet, and it's kind of a break away from the horrors of the war. But this firefighter saved this cat from the rubble of a building, and he is now giving it a little wash with some of the water from the fire hoses. So I gotta say, it was really sweet, really cute. So I'm not gonna hold y'all up for too long. I'm just gonna let y'all watch it. So now we can see him putting the cat in the fire truck. Very sweet little video. It's nice to see that every once in a while there is a little glimmer of kindness and such that comes through this war. We don't really see it much. Of course, it is a war, and usually wars bring out the worst in people, but it also brings out the best in people. And we can see here that even though the cat, is not as important as a person, same with dogs, that the Ukrainians go out of their way to try and take care of the dogs and cats, pets in general, here and there. So I'm just very happy to see that, and it was a very nice, cute little video. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see sappers clearing the fields, getting them ready for harvest. The reason why they're doing this is because if a tractor is operating in the field and it happens to run over an explosion, not an explosion, an explosive, and the explosive explodes, that could of course cause a lot of problems that could also injure or kill the farmer. And so they're out there right now with drones and also sappers as well, looking for explosives inside of these fields and making sure to clear them so that way it is safe for the farmers to continue the planting season. So with that, here's the video. Of course, I have to mute it because they've got copyrighted music playing. So we can see here an interview being done with a Ukrainian soldier. They are now walking around the fields, it looks like with a metal detector most likely. We can see there that there is a mine in the field. So now they're getting it ready to be moved. Well, actually, it looks like they're flipped it over, apparently. So now they're unscrewing, I guess, the pressure plate. I'm not exactly sure. I would say what is going on, but unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure what they're doing because I don't know how to defuse a mine. We can see here, I believe that is the pressure plate that a vehicle would drive over or someone would step on to make it explode. We can now see another interview with the Ukrainian soldier. He's most likely explaining how the defusing operation works. Unfortunately, we can't have it unmuted because there's copyrighted music playing over it. And we wouldn't understand Ukrainian in the first place to really say. But we can now see the Ukrainian sappers using metal detectors to try and look for explosives under the road itself. We can now see apparently they have maybe found an explosive somewhere on the road. Actually, no. Change that. They kept on moving. So now we can see another interview being conducted. Unfortunately, we just don't know what the guy is saying. Of course, we don't speak Ukrainian, and it has copyrighted music playing, which does force me to mute the video. We can also see a flipped over mine right here in this part of the field. Looks like he is defusing it. And with that, that's the end of the video. It is good to know that the Ukrainians are working as hard as possible to make sure that the farm fields, which are incredibly important to Europe's food supply, are being cleared of explosives, so that way it is safe for the farmers to continue their work and make sure that the pretty much entirety of Europe will continue to have regular food supplies. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next location unknown news, where we can see Ukrainian soldiers resting in an entrenchment. Here we can see them in a large foxhole. In this first picture, where they're just sitting there relaxing. Of course, it is good to see them relaxing. It does it's just nice to see. There's really no qualitative observation that can be made about it. It's just good to see, and I'm very happy to know that the Ukrainians are getting some well-deserved rest for defending their country doggedly for nearly the past 2 months. Also, speaking of which, today is day 59. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that, because tomorrow is Sunday, which is the weekly fundraiser, and it's going to be day 60, which will officially make this war 2 months long. So, on top of it being the Sunday fundraiser, which is a big deal, it'll be the beginning of the second month. So, got to give it to the Ukrainians. They've now held for 8 weeks, and I've just got to say it's a huge achievement for them, considering that they were never expected to last beyond 24 to 48 hours at the start of this war. So once again, let's give them all a huge round of applause, especially the soldiers who have been defending this country with the most stiff resistance that could ever be imagined. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next picture, where you can see a Ukrainian soldier holding up some kind of piece of metal, and you can also see a very nicely made foxhole. It actually looks like they have some kind of foam sheets on the side of it, and 2 soldiers under a blanket. It's a kind of a neat video, because these guys look really cozy in this little foxhole that they've made. And so, just got to say, it's a neat little picture. Unfortunately, there is no link in the description below to this map, so this is really the only place you'll be seen. But with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see an abandoned Russian convoy. So here's the video. We can also see that this guy has a suppressor, which is very nice. But nonetheless, we can see an abandoned fuel truck. Those are a bit of a more rare find. Now the video, of course, has lost its quality. Let me go see if I can fix that. Put it on 720, rewind it. Nah, it doesn't look like it's going to fix itself. But nonetheless, when the video was in normal resolution and playing normally, you could see that there was about 5 to 6 more Russian vehicles that had been abandoned on the side of the road, and it looks like the Ukrainians will be able to operate all of these in perfect running order. So I'm very happy to see that. Glad to know that the Ukrainians managed to make the Russians abandon their vehicles in intact and running order, so that way the Ukrainians can repurpose them and use them for themselves, and it's a very good thing to see. Very glad that the Ukrainians managed to give it to the Russians every single day that this war has been going on. We haven't seen any days beyond the first week where the Russians have actually made significant ground anymore. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a sleeping Russian, and the Ukrainians filmed this guy in documentary style. It's like a David Attenborough nature documentary. So nonetheless, I'm going to let y'all see it. Like, the Russian is literally doing that kind of like snore that you hear in the Disney cartoons where he's going... So I'm just going to let y'all see it. It's hilarious.
Прямое доказательство присутствия российских войск на Донбассе. Очень редкий кадр.
So here he is. Listen to this guy.
Со мной полковник ГРУ. Что мы видим? Огневая засада. Территория противника. Какой компьютеры, да. Спрятался за складками местности. То есть трава, бетон стоит. Системный блок, и за ним разведчик. Противник ни за что не догадается.
Okay, so here's something else that I was thinking the whole entire time I was watching this video. These guys could just pick up that AK. You know, I'm not saying that they would or they should or anything, but they could just pick up that AK and either shoot the guy or force him to surrender, since he wouldn't have a weapon anymore. I cannot believe that this guy has been caught so off guard, and he doesn't even have anyone around, any other Russians around him. They're like, hey, dude, someone's coming, or anything like that. They could literally just nab the AK off this guy and run off into the distance, and he would never know what happened. This guy is sleeping so soundly, he can't even hear a gang of dudes standing over him, laughing at him. So that tells you a lot about Russian competence. That's pretty much how the Russians have been fighting this entire war in a single video. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a captured Msta in working condition. This is actually the best video we've seen of an intact Msta, because this one is not just normal. This one was actually seen moving in the video. So that's actually a huge step up from the last videos of Mstas we've seen. Usually they're just sitting in a field and the Ukrainians are checking it out, but this one we could actually see was literally in running order because it was running. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the video and take a look at it. We can of course see the Ukrainians' Lord and Savior over there, the John Deere tractor, and we can now see the Msta moving past the screen, of course in working order, and we can see that the Ukrainians have spray painted the trident all over the Msta, so that way it's not mistaken for a Russian SPG, and it's identified as a Ukrainian SPG. So now we can see them loading it onto a Ukrainian truck, most likely to send off to make sure that it's refitted, repaired if there is anything wrong with it. We can see a little bit of damage on the tank here and there, and then they'll probably start to use it again if they do have ammunition stores for the artillery piece. That's just nuts. Like, it's literally a scavenger hunt for them out there. They just wander out there, find the abandoned Russian vehicles, take them, and then repurpose them for their own use. I gotta say, I'm really impressed with how much the Russians abandon their vehicles, and it tells you how low their morale is, because if their morale was high, they obviously wouldn't abandon the vehicle in running order. They would at least make an attempt to immobilize it or destroy it. Yet we can see in these videos, they make no attempt at that whatsoever, and they just leave them there running. That's insane to me. Anyways, we're now going to move on to the last two bits of location unknown news. And I want to show you all this. I think this is something very important to see, and I think it's something that makes you think. We're here about to watch the Victory Day Parade in Russia. The Victory Day Parade is, of course, scheduled to be very soon, actually. May 9th, if y'all don't know. May 8th was the day that the Germans signed the documents of unconditional surrender to the Allied powers that included the Soviet Union in World War II, on the day of May 8th, 1945. The Russians then sent over another delegation to have a pretty much like mock signing of the unconditional surrender on May 9th, and they arrived there and signed that early in the morning. So officially in former Soviet countries and in the Russian Federation to this day, Victory Day is not May 8th, it's May 9th. So they have a parade every single year to celebrate their victory over the quote-unquote fascists. And so I want y'all to see this video because this is the Victory Day Parade that we will probably be seeing this year. And so without further ado, let's take a look at this video.
На марше бронеавтомобили «Тигр» и «Тайфун» с различными боевыми модулями дистанционного управления.
Pretty nice trucks.
Служебно-боевые задачи.
I don't think they'll be using those this year, will they?
Обстановки и местности. Проходит колонна боевых машин.
Oh, look at these BMP-2s.
БМП
Very nice.
2М.
I bet you will see those at this year's Victory Day Parade.
Оснащенные комплексом динамической защиты,
Don't think so.
позволяющим
Nah,
многократно повысить возможности
probably not.
по сохранению личного состава на поле боя.
Так от буває, коли приходиш на українську землю.
That's a nice BTR-80.
Площади проходит колонна основных боевых танков Т-72.
Very nice T-72 B3 there. I don't think they'll be having those at this year's Victory Day Parade either.
Парадным расчетом капитан
And that's a lot of them that were lost, you gotta admit. They're gonna have a tough time pulling together enough tanks for this year's parade.
в небе пятерка вертолетов К-52 «Аллигатор».
ВВС Росії.
Пилотажная группа «Беркуты». На вертолетах Ми-28Н «Ночной охотник».
Гади, блядь.
Следующий строй
Look at those
представлен
beautiful
четвертый
Su-24s.
фронтовых бомбардировщиков
Oh, that doesn't look good.
Су-24М. Ведущий группы подполковник Герман Анафов. Ура!
Suffice it to say, I think they're going to have some inevitable supply, vehicle, and manpower shortages for this year's Victory Day parade. As you can see in the video, a lot of Russia's pride of their military that they show off every single year at the Victory Day parade has taken massive casualties inside of Ukraine. Of course, we don't have specific numbers on how many of each class has been destroyed, but we do know at this point that the loss of Russian tanks is somewhere near 900, and the loss of APCs in total is somewhere in the range of 1,500 armored personnel carriers. This, of course, is not really large compared to the number they have on the spreadsheets. They have some 12,000 tanks and around 20,000 or more APCs. However, the United States fields a number of tanks that is much less significant than that number. The United States only has 6,000 main battle tanks, yet we have a defense budget of $660 billion, and that's all the tanks we can field on that budget. And considering that the Russians only have 10% of that budget to work off of, some 50 to 60 billion, you can get the idea that that's probably all that's probably all of the running tanks they have in their military are the ones that they're using in this current invasion, and the rest of them would have to be refitted, repaired, and upgraded to be in usable condition, considering that most of them are sitting in far out I guess you could call them silos or motor pools in the middle of nowhere that have been rotting away for decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news, and it's very good news to see. I'm very happy to see that this is, in fact, the case, that we have seen the Slovak T-72 M1s that were promised to Ukraine some time ago finally arriving in Ukraine and in the hands of the Ukrainians moving down the road. And so let's take a look at this video. It is proof that the Slovak T-72s have finally arrived. And it is good to know that Ukrainians' Eastern European friends are stepping up and helping them out as well, along with the United States, who has, at the moment, provided more aid than any other country. And so with that, we're now going to move on from the location unknown news towards Kharkiv and the Donbas in general. But before we do, we're going to take 3 to 5 questions from the chat. Before we do, I do know that some of y'all don't really like the questions. Unfortunately, I do want to make sure that we answer some questions so that way there's a little bit of a breather space and everyone's not just getting the news one after the other during the whole entire stream. So bear with us if you're one of those people. We will be through this very soon. But with that, let's get to the questions. What do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt once again. First up here, we have a $111 donation from Tangan Bragiri, who says, start a fund to the Russian troops so they can have some more vodka, LOL.
Well, thank you very much for the support. I don't really know of a nonprofit that is doing that right now, but I'm sure that that would really help the Russians keep off their toes. But I do thank you very much for the support. I do like the joke. That's a pretty funny one. And speaking of which, we do know that the Russians have been conducting raids every once in a while that we saw on video in the earlier weeks of the war, where they were raiding liquor stores around Ukraine. So it does look like they do need a desperate amount of vodka, and so I believe that someone should reach out and try and help them with their dire need in their alcoholic fix. So I do thank you very much for the support. Pretty funny joke as well. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and next up we have a $100 donation from a longtime channel supporter, Zeta Lane, who says, please keep the war dogs and war kitties coming. The U.S. has some wonderful MLRSs coming. Do we know when they are expected? And also, I heard that donated material is piling up at the border. Has that been worked out?
Unfortunately, I have heard about the news of the supplies building up at the border. As far as I know, it's not actually piling up at the border per se. The Ukrainians have actually lifted all of the restrictions for vehicles entering and exiting the country, so they actually don't have to sit at a customs inspection for weeks on end. They just get driven straight through. What I've heard, though, is that most of the supplies are being built up in Lviv, and they're not really moving from there. I'm not really sure about that report. I'm not really sure if that's some kind of misinformation campaign, or if that's true, because we don't really have an actual figure as to the total tonnage or the total numbers of supplies that are currently tied up in Lviv. To answer the other part of that question, the United States is sending MLRSs over to Ukraine as we speak, but the question is, when will they get there? And that's something that's really tough to answer. The United States doesn't really publish their logistical timetables. We do know that the United States can send supplies anywhere around the world in under 24 to 48 hours. So we've seen that time and time again. So we know that that is a possibility. But nonetheless, I'm not exactly sure when they will get there. If they're being transported by plane, they most likely have to be loaded onto a C-17 or a C-5 Galaxy and then flown overseas. So the flight itself will probably take around 12 to 10 hours, and the actual process of getting the MLRSs to an airfield to load up and then send it over to Poland to get unloaded and then sent into Ukraine, I'm not really sure how long that would take, but I would assume it at least be a week or more. But I thank you very much for the support, Zeta Lane. You've been around for ages, and I do thank you so much for supporting this channel and helping us do what we do. So I thank you very much once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $50 donation from, and hopefully I'm saying this correctly, Oi Lam. Thank you very much for your support of the channel. It is very much appreciated, and we appreciate your generosity. And up next, we have a $50 donation from Rio, who says, Enforcer, thank you to you and your crew for the work you do. Best wishes to y'all. Prayers and regards so that peace, liberty, and freedom will soon be achieved.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you for the kind words right there. I'm happy that you do enjoy the channel, and I do agree that I hope that freedom and the freedom from tyranny will come to Ukraine incredibly soon, and they can manage to push the Russians back out of their lands. We do know that right now there is a Russian offensive ongoing. This has not stopped the Ukrainians from achieving small victories here and there, but as a whole, I actually have noticed that the Ukrainians are taking much less land than they were prior to the offensives. So if anything, the offensive is really more like a renewed and stiff resistance, it seems, because the Russians haven't been taking any new land as far as I can tell, but the Ukrainians are taking much less land back from the Russians as of this moment. And so I thank you very much for the support, and I do hope that the Ukrainians can end this war very soon. I'm not really sure if it will go on beyond May 9th. Maybe the Russians will try and just prolong the war after May 9th, so that way they can get through the patriotic fervor, make sure that that holiday isn't really disrupted with any kind of bad news, and then maybe peace out afterwards. But at this moment, peace talks are currently not even in the picture, so I'm not really sure how much longer this war will last, but I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, that is going to be the end of this question segment. If you have put in a super chat, I thank you very much for the support. We will get to those before the end of the night, most likely in the next question segment or the last one of the night. But nonetheless, we're going to continue on and get on to the Kharkiv news today, which we have very little, but nonetheless, it does paint a picture of the Kharkiv area that is undeniable. So with that, we can actually see that the Russian 64th, which is the unit that was in the Bucha-Hostomel airfield area that was committing a large amount of war crimes, may have been destroyed near Kharkiv today, as pictures have surfaced of destroyed Russian vehicles from the 64th, along with the people who once were in the 64th. I'm not sure if these are the exact war criminals who committed the atrocities in the Bucha-Hostomel airfield area, but nonetheless, it does look like a lot of them may have paid for their crimes if they are the specific perpetrators that were in that area. So I don't think The Hague will be getting a hold of them. I think St. Peter is already talking to them right now, and so we will have to wait and see what their sentencing is on those Russian soldiers. So with that, incredibly good news to see that the 64th has gotten what has been coming to him for a while now. And with that, we're now going to move into the city of Kharkiv, where we can see that there has been some damage once again in the city of Kharkiv today. We know that the artillery bombardments haven't been as heavy as they were in the past. That is, of course, the case. We know that at one point, the Russians were on the ring road around most of the city and were bombarding it day in and day out, while the Ukrainian defenders holding the inner side of the ring road. Now that the Russians have been pushed back miles away from Kharkiv, they've generally stopped their artillery bombardments of the city to the degree that they once were, but nonetheless, I know a lot of people are getting tired of hearing that. Nonetheless, the Russians still are committing artillery bombardments against the city often. And so I'm going to let y'all see this video real quick, which is evidence that the Russians do continue to bombard civilian areas of the city, although there are no strategic or military targets within them. As we can see here, the Ukrainian firefighters, of course, doing an incredible job trying to put out the blaze. We know that the firefighters of Kharkiv have been working overtime in this war. We've seen a whole bunch of videos of their bravery and their heroism under fire, and they never take a break. And so I have to give a lot of credit to them for doing as much as they can to help out in the war as possible. So you can see here a first aid bag somewhere on maybe a car. We can, of course, see another destroyed building from the Russian bombardment. We can actually see the holes that have been made in the walls from either gunfire or shrapnel. I can't really tell which. Usually shrapnel doesn't make a uniform hole shape inside of a wall, so this may have actually been gunfire, but I'm not particularly sure. Don't take that and quote me on it. It may actually just be shrapnel, because we know that firefights have not been ongoing in the city for weeks now. So with that, it may be shrapnel, and most likely is. And you can see that there are fires raging around the rest of the damaged areas in Kharkiv. And it's unfortunate to see. I hope that the firefighters can get this under control, and that the public is not too thrown off by, once again, another attack on the city. I'm not really sure how many people are left in Kharkiv. We know that a decent amount of them left at the beginning of the war, considering that it did become an active battleground nearly since the first few days. So hopefully, the few citizens that are left will not be harmed or too much inconvenienced by this, once again, unsolicited and heinous rocket attack on the city of Kharkiv. And so with that, we're now going to move on from the Kharkiv area, and we're going to start moving further on down the Donbas. We, of course, have not heard any news from this interesting segment of the front here. It's very interesting because the Russians possess a bulge, and the Ukrainians possess a bulge both in the north and more towards the east and southern area of the front. This area, I could see a lot happening in it. It could really go either way. But nonetheless, we haven't gotten any news out of it today. And so with that, we're now going to move beyond that area, and we're going to move on down towards Severodonetsk and Luhansk area of the Donbas. Starting off near Severodonetsk, we have seen Ukrainians come under fire today, but of course, in usual fashion, they're incredibly stoic, and they face the fire with incredible calmness. And so I'm going to let y'all see the video. I'm going to mute it real quick. We can see the cameraman walking around a vehicle. Looks like he's inspecting some kind of foxhole, perhaps. Now we can hear incoming fire from artillery. I'm not really sure if that was artillery. That actually sounded like something else, maybe an autocannon. That sounds like artillery. So we can hear an MLRS attack currently being conducted near or on them, and they are sounding like they're incredibly composed. They're just staying very quiet, probably waiting to hear if the bombardment will stop. We can now see that they're in some kind of foxhole, maybe the one we just saw previously in the video. And so with that, that's the end of the video. But you do have to say, even at the end of the video, when you listen to the tone of their voice, if you can hear that, it was very calm. This is in opposition today to the Chechens that we'll see in a video that were directly attacked by the Azov inside of Mariupol. Or, I'm not exactly sure, it was some kind of artillery barrage. I'm not sure if it came from the Azovstal. I'm not even sure if they have the supplies to conduct an artillery attack on them. But nonetheless, an artillery attack was conducted on the Chechens today, and you'll hear the tone in their voices is very frayed, freaked out, and very alarmed, which tells you that they are not as calm and collected as the Ukrainians, obviously. And so with that, we're now going to move on from the area around Severodonetsk, and we're now going to move further on down the Luhansk region, where we can see Luhansk artillery once again in action. Specifically, the Msta artillery piece, I believe. There's a Msta SPG, and then there's the Msta artillery piece, and I believe that is what we're looking at here. Starting off the video, we of course see a BM-21 Grad in use. This is of course one of Russia's preferred artillery systems. It does lay down a large amount of fire in an incredibly short amount of time over a sizable area. Now we can see the Msta SPG, well, the Msta artillery piece being used. I'm not exactly sure what kind of MLRSs those were. Looks kind of like a Grad. But now we can see, of course, it's really just a montage. I'm trying to give like a description of what's going on in each one, but they're passing by so quick I really cannot. Now you can, of course, see a LPR troop giving an interview. We know that he's probably being entirely truthful. And with that, that is the end of the video. Of course, it's nothing more than the artillery in action, but it is important to show because it does show that the amount of artillery usage they are now having on that front does suggest that they are in the middle of an offensive. Otherwise, they wouldn't be using the artillery so heavily, because artillery is a huge logistical drain, and it takes dozens, if not hundreds, of vehicles to make sure that the artillery stays supplied and ready to go. So I do believe that that does show and, confirms that the offensive is underway in that area. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from the Luhansk region, where we can see LPR heavy artillery in action once again. So here's that video. Actually, it's a picture, correction. We can see it's apparently called a Giatsin S. I have never heard of this. It says an S25. So let me pull that up real quick, and let's take a look at that. S25 SPG. Let's type in the name of it. Giatsin S. And let's take a look at that. So here we are. Here's the Giatsin S. Now we can get a little bit more information on it. It has a 152, let me make sure though, 152 millimeter gun. This, of course, is not as large as the Peon, which has a 207 millimeter gun, but nonetheless, here's a picture of it to give you an idea of what the entire vehicle looks like. This is actually one I have not seen being used in the war before. Let's see if we can get a range on that gun. And see, operational range, it has a range of 311 miles, but I know the gun certainly does not. But unfortunately, it looks like they do not speak of the range. With a range of 28 kilometers or 33 to 40 kilometers. So it's not really a far-reaching or heavy-hitting vehicle compared to the other weapons inside of the Russian inventory. But nonetheless, it is an artillery piece. And it does look like it will probably cause a decent amount of damage, considering that 152 millimeters may not be on the heavy side of things, but it's not certainly on the smaller side. But nonetheless, there's not really much to comment on there. It's just an SPG firing, as usual. And so with that, we're now going to move on down towards the Donbas area, well, the Donetsk area of the Donbas, and near the town of Orlivka, where today we can see a fight occurring in the Donbas. This is, of course, from a drone, and the video title claims that the Russians are clearing the armed forces of Ukrainians' positions, but I'm not entirely sure. So I'm just going to let the video see. I'm just going to show the video, and we're going to see what we can find out from it. So we can see some kind of a flare being fired in the air at the very start of this video. Not exactly sure, but we can actually see that a decent amount of these buildings in this town have been destroyed or burned out. We can see here in this apartment building that a fire started on the 3rd floor and burned out everything else in the building above it. We can also see a small fire burning in the houses near that apartment building. So we're now waiting for the Russians to do any kind of action. The caption was very suspenseful and very thrilling in a way, but it doesn't really look like there's much action being recorded on this drone footage. So we're actually going to skip forward a little bit. Skip forward a little bit more. I'm not really seeing anything, are y'all? Doesn't really look like the Russians are clearing Ukrainian positions in this drone video, does it? Whoa, wait a minute, let's go back. So apparently some kind of large guided bomb, perhaps, hit the building. But my question is, how in the world do they know that Ukrainians are in the building? We didn't get any proof of that on the drone footage. And so what is making that obvious? Also, we can see a gas pipeline back there that is ruptured and is on fire at the moment. But it looks like that explosion took away the other half of the building. But I don't know if there was any Ukrainians in there. It didn't really show a lot. It didn't really prove they were in there. The Ukrainian videos, the Ukrainian drone videos always prove that there are Russians in the video. You know, they're like, look, they're walking into the building, they're now in the building, and then we hit it. But Russian videos don't really show that. They'll just sit there and say, look, there's Ukrainians there, and then a bomb will hit it or something, and then they'll be like, hey, we got them, and we never see them. So I'm not really sure if there were Ukrainians in that building or not. I hope there wasn't, and that was just all for propaganda spoof. because I wouldn't put it past the Russians to use such a large and most likely expensive explosive for a propaganda film. And so with that, we're now going to move further on down the Donetsk area towards Marinka, where today, outside of Marinka, we can see the Russians attacking Ukrainian positions. This is, of course, suggestive and indicative of the Russian offensive that is currently ongoing in the region, at least the one that they're trying to attempt. Of course, it has copyrighted music, but nonetheless, we could see that a Russian ordnance did hit that Ukrainian vehicle, and now the Ukrainian vehicle has been set ablaze, unfortunately. So with that, that's the end of the video. Not really much to comment on there. But with that, we're now going to move on into the village of Marinka itself, where you can see the Russians shelling it. Just days ago, the Russians were completely pushed out of Marinka, and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense claimed that they had control of the entire town, which actually is a very decently sized counterattack, considering that Marinka has been a battlefield since 2014. And so for them to have been pushed out is actually saying a lot about the DPR's position in their own territory. And so with that, I'm going to let y'all see this video. It pretty much speaks for itself. It is a video of a shelling occurring somewhere in Marinka. So with that, here's the video. Of course, it's got copyrighted music, so I have to mute it. But you can see here in these apartment blocks that artillery shells are raining down around them and onto them. We can also see a trench work here, which does, of course, suggest that the Ukrainians have been there for an incredibly long time, because that is not new. That's actually part of the old border that occurred, that kind of formed in between the DPR and LPR all the way back in 2014. So we can now see more explosions raining in. This appears to be the next round in the barrage. No matter how hard the Russians shell Marinka to try and recapture it, I do not think that is in their future anytime soon. The fact that they have been pushed out of it at the very beginning of their offensive on day one tells you that they're probably not going to be able to recapture it, because they simply can't even muster the strength when they're really trying to go for a push in all directions to even hold the city at least. So with that, that's the end of that video. We're now going to move on from the Donetsk area in general, since we've covered all of the news in between here, and we're now going to start moving towards the Mariupol area, where we've still gotten a little bit of news, although there has been reports and suggestions that the Russians have withdrawn most of their forces. But before we do, we're going to answer 3 to 5 more questions from the chat. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so up next we have a super chat from Praise Adonai, who puts in a $30 donation and says, "Whatever happened to the rod from God? I think President Zelensky could use 2, one for the Kerch Straits Bridge and one for Putin. That would end this most quickly. A rod from God would certainly be a bit of unknown location news. Enforcer Matt, if we're out of rods from God, 2 leaf springs will do."
Well, thank you very much for the support. I think really we don't even need a rod from God to take care of Putin. I think we just need to get the nitric acid coke up there to him, and I think that'll fix the whole entire situation. But yes, I can agree that we need to try and get some kind of munitions to the Ukrainians to take out the Kerch Bridge, because if they were able to take out the Kerch Bridge, or the Crimean Bridge as it's called, that would be huge, and it would directly impact Russian logistics to a large amount, because they would have to figure out over an incredibly short amount of time how to fix that issue and how to start ferrying supplies over the Kerch Strait by ship to Kerch itself, unload the supplies, and then have them move on throughout the rest of Crimea to the Russian fronts near Kherson and elsewhere. So I can't entirely agree that it will be imperative for them to destroy the Kerch Bridge, and I'm not really sure if there's anything they can do about Putin, but I do thank you so much for the support, and I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a super chat from Anders Olsen, who puts in a $23 donation and says, "Putin's kleptocracy is built on oil and gas. A coincidence that big gas and oil reserves are in East Ukraine and Crimea. When countries try to be fossil-free, Putin makes them the opposite. Such a smart guy."
I do agree. There actually is proof that there are large natural gas deposits in eastern Ukraine. And another thing, since you asked that question, you've kind of led into the resource war side of things. A lot of people have been talking about Russia is still buying gas and oil from Russia. And whose side are they on? Are they on the Russian side, or are they on the Western side? And I think since we've gotten a question that's kind of in that category, I'm going to use your question to touch on that, because I do think it deserves a decent amount of explanations. So the Germans are a very strict anti-nuclear group of people. They hate nuclear power with a passion. And so after the Fukushima Daiichi power plant incident in 2011, there was a huge diplomatic call inside of Germany, well, a political call in Germany from a lot of sides, a lot of political parties, to have most of the nuclear power plants in Germany shut down. Shutting down these power plants meant that the power that they were going to use had to come from somewhere else. And while renewable energy was right on the horizon and they were starting to try and install as many wind turbines and solar panels as possible, wind turbines and solar panels are not the most effective creator of energy, and it can vary from day to day. And the problem with the power grid is that you can't have a certain amount of megawatts being produced one day and then a lower amount produced the other, because the power has to be directly relative to the amount needed on the grid, which is pretty stable every single day. And so there has to be something to fill that gap. And so they found two things to fill that gap. Well, actually, really three: natural gas power plants, oil power plants, or coal power plants. We're actually going to take a little look at Germany here on Google Maps real quick, because I feel like this is a very important explanation about some of the energy politics that are kind of evolving and forming inside of Germany. So if we come over here, you may notice these three massive pits right outside of Cologne. This one is in fact almost the size of the center of Cologne, Germany, which is an incredibly large city. If you were to take a guess at what this pit was, you'd probably say it was something really extravagant. But what if I told you that all three of these pits are Germany's effort, and they've expanded massively over the past few years? It's Germany's effort to try and supplant the nuclear power loss that they had when they shut down most of their nuclear power plants. These are massive coal pits. That's the whole entire purpose of them. And so, on top of using coal and trying to fill in this gap from the nuclear energy grid that's now missing, they had to go to somewhere else, because there's just not enough coal they can dig out of the ground fast enough to supplant all of their needs on the energy grid. So then that led them to Russia. Russia is a huge supplier of oil and natural gas, and that is one of the major components of a lot of countries' energy grids. And now that Germany desperately needed to find out a way to fill in this gap in their power grid, let's close that thing. But now that they need to desperately close their gap in the power grid, they turn to Russia and they start to buy huge amounts of oil and natural gas from them to then fill in the rest of the power grid and make sure that Germany doesn't start suffering mass power outages. And so this occurred for quite some while, and there was a lot of warnings from the West, because this whole entire energy shift happened at the same time the whole entire Donbas conflict arose in 2014. A lot of countries around the world were telling the Germans, hey, maybe you want to not do that. Maybe you want to find some kind of alternative, because that's going to economically tie you to the Russians, where there's really you don't really have any kind of economic power to sanction them, because you're always going to be reliant on pretty much their energy imports to keep Germany running, pretty much. And the Germans, regardless of if you want to blame the government or not, the Germans are really in a position where they can't do that. They can't reopen the nuclear power plants because there's so many people on all sides of the aisle inside of Germany that hate nuclear power so much that that's just not an option anymore. And so they have to continue down this route because they're kind of stuck in it. And so now they're in the situation that the Russians are doing something heinous, and they've tried to sanction them as much as they can, but they cannot cut off the oil and natural gas imports that they're getting from Russia. If they did that, Germany would start suffering massive power outages because there just wouldn't be enough power on their grid to keep the entire nation running. And as you may know, electrical power is incredibly important to the upkeep of modern civilization. You have to have electrical power to run hospitals. You have to have electrical power to run emergency buildings. You have to have electricity to run everything. The whole entire world runs on electricity. And so they simply cannot cut off the imports. And so it's not really a question of Germany politically trying to side with the Russians. It's a question of, does Germany want to exist as a first world developed country, or descend into darkness and become some kind of weird European hellhole in a way? And so that's kind of the situation that they found themselves in, due to an inevitable string of coincidences and occurrences that have led them down this very unfortunate path where they really don't have the choice to say we're no longer going to be importing Russian oil and gas. So I hope that kind of addresses that in a way, and I do thank you very much for the support and bringing up a question that could lead me into explaining why the Germans are stuck in the situation they are. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to one more question, and then we're going to continue on with the news.
And just real quick, I'm noticing a lot of people mentioning nuclear power in the chat, and without spoiling anything about the upcoming video, I think you're going to find that video to be very interesting to you. And I'm not going to say anything else because I think I'm going to spoil it if I keep talking.
Well, you kind of already have.
Well, not as bad as I could have, but anyways, moving on to the next super chat we have from HT, who puts in a $20 donation and says, "Enforcer, you are the William L. Shirer of our age, documenting this war for our generation. Thanks for all you do, and it will be remembered. Also, can you tell me where you got the Ukrainian national anthem video from?"
Well, I thank you very much for the support. I don't really know who that William fella is, but I am glad to know that you are putting me up there on a pedestal with that fella. I do appreciate that a lot of people enjoy the quality of news I deliver to that degree. But to answer your question about where the intro video comes from, if you type in on YouTube, if everyone would do this right now because you'll find this video, it's called Ukraine War Anthem. Ukraine Anthem War 2022. Just type that in and you will find the video. It's pretty much the first one that pops up. And it's got the exact same footage in it, the exact same music. And unfortunately, the guy who posted that video on that channel doesn't have the rights to it either. And no one can track down who made this video. Nonetheless, while we can't find the guy, I've got to thank whoever made it so much because they made the most patriotic and stirring Ukrainian anthem video I have ever seen. And I haven't found one to replace it yet where I could actually give the person who made it the credit they deserve. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're now going to return to the news because we've answered all of the questions of this segment. We will, of course, revisit the questions again and ask them all. We'll answer them all at the end, and also some questions from the live chat. So stick around. You might be one of the lucky people who gets their question answered at the end of the stream. And so with that, we're now going to move on into Mariupol. We're going to start at the farthest outreach of the city and then move in towards the Azovstal itself. And so starting out on the eastern side, we can see a film crew from the Russian side under mortar attack on the outskirts of town. So here's the video of that. We can see the mortars raining in. Of course, it seems kind of staged because of, as usual with the Russians, it's just one blast, and then they turn around, walk off, and they're like, wow, look how close that attack was. The thing with a mortar or any kind of artillery barrage, they're not just going to fire one round at you and call it quits. They're going to keep firing a massive barrage at you because that's how artillery works. They don't really just do a precision strike with one shot, and they're like, yeah, we got him. That's not how it works. And, you know, you don't have to be a huge military strategist to know that. That's just how artillery operates. But anyways, we're now going to move on to the next video from Mariupol, where we can see the TikTok superstar's house gets hit. So I'm going to let y'all see this real quick. We can see that their little house got hit. And you may have remembered I was talking about this video a little bit earlier in the stream, and you can actually hear the panicked voices that they have in this video. So I'm going to let it play, and I'm just going to let y'all listen to them. You can hear them all yelling out in the distance and running. Now, this guy actually filming, he doesn't sound too scared. He sounds kind of blitzed, honestly, but nonetheless, you could hear all of them in the distance kind of freaking out and being scared, which you do not hear in the Ukrainian videos. You hear nothing. It's very calm and collected, which tells me that the Chechens apparently don't have as much training, or they might be scared of what's going on. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news inside of Mariupol, where we can see on the outskirts of the Azovstal some more fighting occurring today in Mariupol. While the fighting has died down largely, we can still see that there is small amounts of skirmishes that are occurring around the Azovstal. So I'm going to let y'all see this video. So you can see them standing around the BTR-82. They're acting like they're about to go into some kind of sports match. When you see them standing in a line, this is of course the perfect thing you want to do in a firefighting situation, is get lined up in a perfect row and follow the BTR-82 in. So of course, copyrighted music is playing. I hate that because now I have to mute the video. But nonetheless, the BTR-82 is moving up with everyone walking in a line like they're going to lunch at school. I'm sure this will end well for them if this was actually a real firefight, but we know that it's probably staged. So you now see them following the BTR-82. Hardly. I mean, like, really, they're just kind of standing around and maybe waddling. But now we can see the ones in the rear actually running and trying to catch up to the BTR since they lagged behind a little bit too much. So now we can see the BTR apparently firing. I cannot tell. They are once again lined up behind the BTR. Now, this is something a little solid. They're behind the vehicle and they're all lined up so that way the vehicle will protect them a little bit. That's actually a pretty normal tactic right there that you see in a lot of situations. You may have also seen them do that in the movie Fury, which was a terrible movie, and I just hated it. Didn't like it at all. It was hyped up and it was just awful. But anyways, the video continues and we can now see them running from behind the BTR-82, and it looks like towards the abandoned and destroyed building that is in front of it. So we can now see them inside the building. They are now trying to figure out if this is home or what, because I'm sure it's not much worse off than the normal Russian home at this point, considering the economic sanctions and the fact that the Russian economy will probably begin to fall apart completely within the next 2 weeks. We now see them running once again in large groups through the open to another building. We now see the BTR-82 lighting up another high-rise. Now the soldiers are slowly climbing into the next building, once again in a large group right outside of it. Incredibly good for if there was a machine gunner nearby. I'm sure the machine gunner would miss this massive clump of men climbing into this building very slowly. And so with that, we can see explosions rocking the high-rise out in the distance. It looks like the BTR-82 is lighting the thing up, but of course we don't know if there are Ukrainians inside of it or not. We can now see them all. Oh my god, this. Oh, golly, Jesus. Look at this. Look at this clip. Let's watch that again. These guys are standing here like they're waiting for the bus. Well, you can't make this stuff up. They're literally in the open. The cameraman is in front of them, supposedly where the Ukrainians are, looking back at them and filming them all, standing in a massive group like they're waiting for the BTR like it's some kind of bus. So anyways, the BTR is moving up. The guys are standing there all like, oh, is this the 805 bus? And now they're going to start following it, I suppose. Although we really can't tell. Also, got to commend the BTR-82 suspension there. It actually looks kind of nice. Probably some kind of leaf springs. So you now see all the soldiers moving up in a large group, of course in a line. But this time they're not really behind the BTR, they're actually beside it, so that's kind of defeating the purpose of lining up. Also, it looks like they're actually running at the same building. It looks like the Russians have flipped around the order of the footage. And they showed the end part of this clip first, and now they're showing this. That doesn't make any sense, and I don't know why they had to break up the continuity of the film. So now we can see the BTR-82 firing once again at the high-rise we saw earlier, and for some reason they flipped around the sequence of the footage in this video, which makes no sense to me why they would do that, rather than to try and paint some kind of story where the Russians looked better off than they were, but it doesn't even do that. So let's see if there's any music here. There's not. So we can hear the BTR-82 firing. Now there's music again, so I gotta mute it. So now we see the BTR-82 spazzing out, backing up, driving forward, and firing at the same building over and over. We can now see that same exact building, and they're still firing at it. The infantry is nowhere to be seen. It looks like they've gone into the abandoned building, and they've decided that that's good enough. It looks a lot like Perm or Volgograd. So with that, the BTR-82 is now running off, leaving the infantry behind, as we can see in the video, and now the infantry have decided that this is the place they'll live. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news. We've actually gotten 2 bits of news from inside of the Azovstal today. Here's some footage from the Azovstal. This was actually taken by a drone. And as far as we... Oh, I'm sorry, correction. That's actually the next video. This video is actually of Ukrainian soldiers and the citizens that are inside of the bunkers below the Azovstal, conversating with each other and just living their lives out inside of the Azovstal. So I'm going to let y'all see this real quick. Okay, 1 second. Let me go get Twitter open, shut that down, and then click on this video again and get it full screen.
Привет! Як дела? Як ваші діла, дівчатка? Що ви, нові корзинки делали, чим ви займалися?
Ні, я корзинку з прошлого.
Да? А я бачу, ти ж тут плила, да, по-моєму, прошлый раз?
So this is actually apparently from the context, this seems to be a Ukrainian soldier that's filming, and while these poor little girls and their families are stuck inside of this Azovstal plant and in the bunkers below it, they've managed to get these little girls in the Easter spirit and have had them make Easter baskets. Now, isn't that sweet or what? And that makes it so much worse thinking about it, because they're still trying to keep these kids' innocence intact, although this terrible war is unfolding right above their heads, where these brave Ukrainian men who are filming this video are up there dying every single day to try and keep these citizens out of the hands of the Russians, who will do untold things to them, like kill them, deport them, or something of that nature. And it just makes the whole entire thing that much more sad, honestly. But I'm going to keep the video running.
Класс. Це для украшений, да?
Да.
Яка красота. Красиво, умничка.
Короче, мы с Ростиком играли в Супер Б. Это такая игра на телефоне. Он стесняется.
Да?
Давай.
Класс. Ой, вибачте.
Мы бы так бы играли в телефон, но хочется домой, хочется солнце увидеть.
Ой, який котик у тебе, клас.
Здравствуйте, мы тут это...
Привет.
Я увидел, что вы...
So one of the girls said that they've been playing a game on a phone, but they stopped because they just want to see the sun, and they want to go home. So we're going to let the video continue.
Вот хотел бы кое-что сказать.
Давай.
Мы вот очень хотим вернуться все домой, хотим вернуться живыми, хотим увидеть своих родителей, ну, не родителей, родных там и так далее. Все, которые поэтому...
Да. А ну ви вже тут всі самі подружилися, скоро будете виберетесь і будете всі місці далі дружити. Будете, да?
Well, that not gonna lie, that video almost made me cry, but I hope that those kids do make it out of there fine and that they'll be safe. We know that the defenders are doing their damnedest to make sure that those kids will stay as safe as possible, and I hope that they are able to get out of there safely and see their families again. So with that, we're going to move on to the next video where we can see a bird's eye view of the Azovstal from above, where the defenders are still holding their ground against the Russians. We know that the Russians are no longer pushing the Azovstal as hard as they once were, and so hopefully the defenders will still be able to hold, even if the offensive resumes with much greater intensity in the coming weeks. And so here's the video of Azovstal from above. Also, it has copyrighted music, so unfortunately I have to mute it. But nonetheless, here's the footage. We can actually tell, real quick, we're actually going to show where this drone is starting off on the map. If we come down here, you can actually see the Azovstal here. This drone appears to be somewhere in this area where my mouse cursor is, because you can actually see the Kalmius River in this drone footage off to the right, and then you can see it make its left turn out towards the sea, which it does right here. So it appears that it's starting off somewhere over here, and it's looking west towards the Azovstal. So with that, now we kind of have a context of where this is. We can actually see Russian artillery still landing on the outskirts of the Azovstal, which does tell us that they haven't been pushed entirely into the metallurgical plant itself. The Ukrainians may actually have still a grip on the residential buildings surrounding the plant. So as we can see here, it looks like there are 2 Russian vehicles down there where the explosion occurred. It may have been a tank firing into one of the buildings, but you can now see that one of them inching closer to the Azovstal, hopefully to its quick demise. And there's the Azovstal plant. You're actually looking at part of it right there. It's a very huge, sprawling complex, of course, as you can see from Google Maps. And so that isn't the entire building there. It's actually part of the series of buildings that make up the metallurgical plant as a whole. You can see the rest of it there as it pans to the left. And you can also see a large heap over here on the side. We can now see explosions rocking the other buildings inside of the Azovstal. And one thing I'm very happy to know is that the children and citizens that are currently stuck inside of the metallurgical plant aren't in the buildings themselves. They're actually in bunkers below ground, which are relatively safer than being on the surface. But it's still sad to know that those poor kids are stuck in there. We can also see a Russian vehicle moving around down there. I'll rewind that real quick. Where my mouse cursor is, I can't really tell what kind of vehicle it is, but we can see it moving around. It looks like it's going back towards the street. You know, considering how sad it was to see those kids inside that bunker, which kind of threw me off, and I'm trying to keep my composure here. But I hope that the Ukrainians are able to manage pushing the Russians back and inflicting as many casualties on them as possible, considering that they're putting such poor innocent kids in that kind of position. It's sickening, and it reminds me of how sick these bastards really are that are fighting this war on the Russian side. That they would put kids in a position like that, and they're not even going to allow a humanitarian corridor to successfully be established and operated for the Ukrainians to get these kids out of such a dangerous situation and remove them from the war. So we can see the rest of the Azovstal. I'm not really sure what the red swiping thing on the top of the screen is, but nonetheless, the video is ended, and that gives you a good idea of what the hell unfolding above those civilians looks like, where the Azov soldiers go every single day and ensure that the Russians will not push in there and have these citizens under their control. I have to say, when you look at a video like that was as sad as it was with those kids, I pray that those Azov defenders can hold that metallurgical plant until the end of time itself. Because to think that poor innocent kids like that are put into Russian hands and untold things can happen to them. They could be sexually abused, assaulted, deported out of Ukraine itself and into Russia, and then adopted by a Russian family and taught Russian and taught to hate their own country is sickening. It's terrible. With that, I don't really have much to say. That pisses me off to no end that the Russians are as sick as that. And so we're going to move on towards Kherson, where we have gotten some incredible good news today because the pigs that are doing this to the Ukrainians appear to be paying the price, as we've heard that a rocket attack has been conducted on a facility near Kherson today, which has supposedly killed another 2 generals. Generals are, of course, at the very top of the command structure of every single military, and so these are the people who make sure that atrocities like we're seeing occur in the Azovstal happen, and they ensure that they will continue to keep on going. And so it's good to see that 2 of them once more have been killed, and of course that will not change the Russians' position. Putin will of course just promote another guy to that position and the war will continue, but nonetheless it is good to know that some of the top brass are paying for what they've done. The link is right here. It just takes you to the person who made the claim, his Twitter post. As you can see here, he says, artillery did kill 2 Russian generals last night during the attack on their CNC. So it's, of course, good to know that that did occur, and we will be waiting for more information to make sure that that is verified and truthful. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the news outside of Kherson, where we can see Ukrainian mortar in action. We're not really sure how what artillery destroyed the headquarters where those 2 generals were at, but it may have been a mortar, so I'm not entirely sure. Not trying to tie things together, but here is the video of the Ukrainian mortar in action. It's actually an incredibly small mortar. It definitely was not this mortar that took out the Russian generals. This is like a 61 millimeter at best. It's probably a 40 millimeter, really, when you think about it. A very, very small mortar, to say the least. Very easy to carry for the infantry, though, and it does allow them an extra bit of firepower in a large amount of situations, which does help the infantry do a little bit more, to try and make the most simplistic description as possible. But with that, we're now going to move on to the next videos, which are coming from Mykolaiv, and I believe, rather than the 3 bits of video I've gotten in Odessa, this is getting close to the end of the news for the night. And so with that, we can see that Russian dog gets new owners. We know that this dog is in much greater hands now than he was before. This was a German Shepherd, I believe. Let me check that, though. A Belgian Shepherd, that was owned by the Russian military, and when the Russians retreated, they left the dog behind, because that's how little they care about anything, manpower, dogs, and everything in between. And so they left the dog behind, and the Ukrainians now have the dog, and now they are using it. I'm sure that the dog is under much better conditions than it was with the Russians, and that it's going to have a very good future, ahead of itself. So I'm very glad to see that. And with that, there's not really much to say, and so we're going to move on to the Odessa news, where we've seen more atrocities committed by the Russians today. Today we saw that 2 cruise missiles, most likely, let me make sure I get the name correct, a caliber. I'm sorry, correction. I don't really know. I'm kind of drawing a blank there. But nonetheless, we can see that a missile attack did occur on Odessa today, as 2 cruise missiles flew into the city and hit 2 residential buildings. So I'm going to let y'all see this footage. It is once again clear evidence of Russian war crimes, but you can see the ballistic missile right there. Well, the cruise missile, correction. That's on its way to its target in Odessa. You can actually see that its angle has gone downwards, which means that it's on its final approach to the target. You can now hear the report of the explosion in the distance, where it has hit a building. The first one hit off camera. The second one that we were watching at the very beginning of the video also hit its target. We also have another angle of this video that shows the missile directly hitting one of the residential buildings. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next video that shows the next angle of this attack. Of course, it was a baseless attack, not attacking any military targets whatsoever, and just going directly for civilian infrastructure. So you can see the cruise missile coming in right there. It's on its downward attack like we saw in the first video, and it goes right into this residential building and hits it on the lower floor. The Russians claimed that this cruise missile attack was a success and it destroyed Ukrainian weapon caches, but I think you and me can see from this video that that was certainly not a weapons cache, and that was certainly a cache of innocent civilians that were inside that building that probably just got splattered across the floor by a baseless Russian attack on civilians once again. At this point, I honestly think the entire Russian military ought to pay for this, because there's no way you can say that the average Russian grunt is not pretty much involved in these war crimes at this point. While this is a cruise missile, we know that the Russian infantry takes it upon themselves to execute civilians on their own. And so, I think at this point, really all Russian prisoners should be treated as war criminals and should be brought before some kind of war crime tribunal, to put it the best way possible. And so with that, we're going to go to the last bit of news we've gotten for tonight from Odessa, where we can see the result of the damage in Odessa. So this is a video of someone in a car driving by the burning smoke and plumes from one of the buildings. And with that, that is the end of the news for today. And so I thank you all so much for coming. If you did send in a super chat, we are going to answer it. And if also you want to send in a question through the live chat and not send in a super chat, we also answer some of those as well. So with that, we're now going to get on to the questions. What do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so first up, we have a $60 donation from Rob Scott, who says, "Buy them Alberta Canadian vodka."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I think that if we can, we'll get them some Canadian vodka, and maybe lace it with a little bit of arsenic as well. So I thank you very much for the support. And once again, it does help out this channel a huge deal. Also, donation number, nice. That's all I got to say about that. But thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Don Beal, who says, Enforcer, Russia has diverted forces from Georgian borders to Ukraine. What about NATO sending supplies to Georgia for opening another front? Where's the tie eater when he's needed? And Slava Ukraine.
Herom Slava. And also to answer that question, yes, the Russians have been moving forces away from the Georgian area, especially in South Ossetia. I'm not really sure if NATO want the Georgians to go to war with the Russians, because while that would open up a second front, the question is, will the Georgians fare well at all? I'm not really sure about their military situation, and so it may be the case that they wouldn't fare well, and that it would be a terrible idea. It may be like a Gallipoli, but once again, I'm not entirely sure. It could actually do pretty well and be largely successful. But nonetheless, I do hope that answers the question. And with that being said, I thank you so much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Old Salty Squid, who says, You two are amazing. Are you related? I want you to take this money and buy tacos and beer. I'll be donating to Sunday's fundraiser, so please take this for yourselves. Now I'm going to go buy an Enforcer t-shirt.
Thank you very much for the support, and I would like to make it clear to everyone, and I've made this clear a lot, but I'm not really sure if a lot of people know it, or if some of y'all are new or something, but all of the super chats are to support the channel. There is no, like, when you give a super chat, it's like none of it's being donated. Like I put $100 in every single Sunday, but there's not like an earmarked percentage of each super chat that's going to be sent towards a fundraiser. The super chats are meant to support the channel and help us to continue running and making sure that we can go out and make videos and things like that, and just pretty much try and keep the channel living. So I thank you very much for the support. And I do thank you for the suggestion for tacos and beer. And to answer that first part of the question, yes, we are related. We're actually brothers. So thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a super chat from Doug Sharp, who puts in a donation of $11.47. I'm not sure if he meant anything by that, but that's a kind of an interesting number. He says, your World War II/Ukraine war comparison, the beginnings are scarily identical, but what if Czechoslovakia had kicked Germany's ass and the Allies had poured material into the conflict? World War II stopped? ?
I'm not really sure. I mean, like, honestly, here's what would have really happened in the best term situation, if we were to say the point that this is all at right now. This would kind of be like Germany annexing the Sudetenland and then the rest of Czechoslovakia, making Slovakia a puppet, and then going to war with Poland. But instead of there being the long pause that the British and the French had, where they thought this was going to turn into World War I 2.0, if they had just pushed into Germany right then, the Germans really had no way to fight both the Polish and the French and the British at the same time. And so I believe that would be a more adept description, because Germany invading Poland was like Russia invading Ukraine in a way. And so if Britain and France had gotten involved and started to push an offensive on the western side of Germany as soon as they invaded Poland, as the Germans invaded Poland, I believe that would have been a very adept description. And I think that would have stopped World War II in its entirety, at least as far as it went, because the Germans wouldn't have been able to extend their ambitions into North Africa, most likely, or into the Soviet Union, and it would have been a very small-scale world war that would have just been encompassing a few major European countries. But I don't know. I think it would have tied in the Russians anyways, because the Russians had done the Molotov-Ribbentrop Act, and they pretty much invaded Poland with the Germans. So I don't know if that meant that the British and the French would have had to go to war with the Soviets, and I think that's what actually stopped them from doing anything, is that the Soviets got involved. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for the support. And I hope that does answer the question in a way. I think under your scenario as well, where the Allies supported the Czechs and the Czechoslovakians were beaten Germany, I think that would have also made World War II go in a very different direction as well, although I'm not sure how well Czechoslovakia would have done in the first place. But I thank you very much for the support once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Hole Lee, who says, Hey, Enforcer, I heard the other day that you are majoring in history. I, too, will be entering that major and was wondering if you have any info or advice.
So let me pull out my little ivory pipe here and smoke on it real quick and dispel some very good advice about a history degree. Okay, so history degrees are really, like, for the most part, the history you learn in college isn't that different than the history you learn in high school. And the other thing is that if you haven't gone to college yet, you actually learn that college classes are really about reading the textbooks, the assigned readings, and just knowing the material instead of actually like delving deep and like really doing something huge. So you can actually really do very well with it in a history major if you just know history going into it beforehand. Like I had a class that covered European history, Western civilization from 1660, which is kind of weird that they picked 1660. Honestly, I would have picked 1640 onto the present. And so I aced that class. I never even actually opened up the textbook in that class. I just went in, did the tests, and I made like a 95. So if you know history and you're going into a history major and you're planning on getting that degree, if you just know history backwards and forwards from the start, you'll actually do incredibly well. But one thing I did not do well on this semester was ancient history. Well, ancient European history, you know, from I guess you could say the Greek era to the medieval era, because I don't know squat about really anything. I know the general gist about, you know, ancient history with Rome, the legions, some of the emperors, some of the things that the Republic did and stuff like that, but I'm not a huge buff on Roman history because I just don't really think it's relevant to the modern world anymore. I know that like Latin culture is kind of like the basis of everything in Western Europe, but we've moved beyond it so far that I really think that all you need to know about the modern world you can learn from 1640 onwards, because that's when I defined the modern era as beginning and starting to coalesce into what it is like 1640 onwards. But nonetheless, that's kind of like my niche in history that I focus on. It did me incredibly well, but as long as you focus and know backwards and forwards a specific era in history, you can generally get a lot of classes to revolve around that, and you will do incredibly well. So I hope that answers the question. Also, I just saw someone in the comments say, Lilith Embers said, "LOL, the Enforcer. I don't know squat about anything." Hey, I don't. I'm not saying I'm some kind of like, you know, goofball here or anything. I am smart to a degree, but I'm not going to act like I know everything on Earth. So I hope that is answered both of y'all's questions, and I thank you so much for the support once again. And it does help us to continue to run this channel. Sorry, I drew a stutter there out of that. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Neil Wojan, who says, Enforcer, did you know that Ukraine invented the first technical? It was invented in Nestor Matko's Black Army, a horse-drawn machine gun cart called the Tachanka.
I agree. Well, actually, I don't agree. I did know that, and I think you actually sent that one in yesterday, or someone sent in a very similar worded one. Yes, the Ukrainians did use a Tachanka, and we actually know that the wagons had leaf springs on them, so I was like, wow, that's really cool. And also, a Tachanka is, just to recap again, a 3-horse-drawn wagon that has a Maxim machine gun mounted onto the back of it. They would pull the thing through the fields as fast as they can, spin the thing around, and then fire on the enemy forces, and then pretty much fly off as fast as they can. So I hope that that answers the question. And also, real quick, to get back to something else, OGGE guy 1234 said, what happened in 1640? The English Civil War happened in 1640, and I think that was really, in my opinion, the defining point and how modern history would play out from then on. So I thank you very much for the support and also sending in that question, and I thank you once again for the support. It does help us to continue to run this channel. So I hope I've answered both of y'all's questions, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from John Dilly 1974, who says, been my end-of-night routine since day 9. Might have missed one night since. Sitting in the hot tub, drinking bourbon, waiting for the stream to kick off. Slava Ukraine, and thank you, Enforcers.
Heroam Slava, and also, that is really cool. You're living it lavishly, man, watching an Enforcer stream in a hot tub drinking bourbon. Now, that is the life. I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that you have enjoyed tonight's stream. And of course, your support does help this channel keep going. And so thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right. And up next, we have a question from Junebug72, who puts in a $10 donation and says, hello from Northern California, Slava Ukraine. That subway speech by Zelensky, though, I'm happy you're here and thank you.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to listen to the subway speech, but I did see a little bit of the opening of it, and of course, it opened in the usual Zelensky format, which is the typical speech that you see great statesmen give. So I thank you very much for the support. I am going to, of course, try and watch that video as soon as I can. And with that being said, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from KG1337, who says, "What is your opinion of channels that prop up the Russian narrative?"
Well, my opinion of anything pro-Russian is that it's misguided, poorly informed, and stupid at worst. So that kind of is my answer to that question as well. I think YouTube channels that are supporting a Russian narrative are stupid, misguided, and they're really anti-Western in a way. There is a tenet of goals that the United States must maintain to make sure that we stay the major power player in most areas of the world. And in Europe, one of those things is maintaining our kind of like imbalance of power and making sure that we have a leading edge over our rival, the Russian Federation. And so anything that helps us further that goal is critically important, and in Ukraine, that goal can be furthered. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have an $11 donation from Level 70, who says, "There are rumors that NATO forces will move into Western Ukraine to free up Ukrainian forces to go east. What are your thoughts?"
I don't think that's going to happen. Of course, if NATO forces move into Ukraine, Russia will take that as a declaration of war by NATO, and so that could start kicking off a whole bunch of things that I don't really think anyone would be happy to see. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think that is just going to remain a rumor, but if it doesn't, and I'm wrong, that will be something huge, and I'm not really sure what that would lead to. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers that question in a way. I haven't heard about that, and honestly, I hope that NATO doesn't do that, because that would pretty much lead the entirety of NATO directly into this war, and then it would evolve into a world war. So I thank you very much for the question. Hopefully they don't. I mean, like, honestly, here's the reason why I said hopefully they don't do that, because I've said at the same time, because I was just thinking, I've said at the same time, we need to stand up for our morals more so than our safety. And so that would be standing up for our morals more so than safety. But at the same time, that's not giving them an ultimatum that allows them to step out before we do that and go straight into a war. So I think, honestly, if we were to tell the Russians, listen, this war needs to end or else we are going to do that, I think that would be the proper way to do that. But if they do that, honestly, I would be kind of afraid, considering that they didn't try and at least make a diplomatic situation out of it first. But nonetheless, I would support it in the end. So I thank you very much for the support. I'm not sure if it will happen once again, but with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Sniper1, who says, "Looks like the victory parade is going to be like 10 to 30 minutes long instead of their usual 1.5 hours. Slava Ukraine."
Heroam Slava, and also to answer that, I do believe that it's going to be a lot shorter this year, if not non-existent. Well, it's not going to be non-existent. The Russians have to have that Victory Day parade every single year as a huge part of their propaganda and their culture. So they will have the Victory Day parade, but we probably will see it shortened heavily, or we're going to see a lot of older vehicles being used that are painted up to look brand new. So either way, it's not going to be the same Victory Day parade that we've seen before. And with that being said, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Tito McLovin, who says, "I beg to differ. Fury was an awesome movie. The collapse of the Fillet Gap was when Gordo mentioned they shot horses all day. You need to see it again. There's a cult following on this flick."
I do agree that there is a cult following on that flick. The thing, though, is that I didn't really like the typical stereotypical tropes that it kind of put out. You know, you had like the same cast of people in that war movie that you have in the rest of them. I'm not saying that Brad Pitt's in every war movie, but hear me out on this one as I explain it. You've got the super macho man, you know, I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with being a macho man or anything, but when you have the same kind of, like, I eat nails for breakfast kind of guy in every single war movie, it kind of gets old, because he always, and then, you know, if they've got him, they've got the lackadaisical paper pusher in the wrong part of the frontlines guy who's all soft and stuff, and the macho man takes it upon himself. Listen, son, I'm gonna shove your head in my up my ass and fart on you to teach you how tough shit is, you know. And it's like, it's just like the same kind of like war movie that's been being made for nearly like 15 years at this point over again, and the only thing that they improved is that they actually used historically accurate vehicles, and they somehow got the only remaining operational Tiger in the world in the movie. So honestly, I feel like movies like Saving Private Ryan, you didn't have a tough guy in Saving Private Ryan. Like, you didn't have the macho man. They all seemed like very normal, convincing people. And that's what I liked about Saving Private Ryan. And a lot of old war movies used to do that instead. You didn't have macho men. You know, you just had normal guys. You know, and normal men can become macho men when they need to. But, like, the modern world has created this thing of, like, this like, fake super macho man. Like, he's got to go around, even, you know, like when he's just in the normal world, you know, and people like creature comforts and stuff. That's just normal. You know, everyone likes a hot shower, warm food. And they've created this guy who goes, oh, I like to eat MREs and I like to drink my own piss even when I don't need to because I live in a house with running water that's cold and got ice and stuff. And it doesn't make any sense to me. But, you know, that's kind of like my critique on kind of like modern war movies. I feel like they really need to start focusing on normal, relatable people instead of these like kind of like fake made up people in a way and how their personality is. But thank you very much for the support. Sadly, we'll have to agree to disagree there. But nonetheless, I thank you once again for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a super chat from Rockets Red Wines, who puts in a $10 donation and says, keep up the great work, Enforcer and Matt, and Christos Voskres. Sunday is Easter for us of Orthodox faith.
I do know that, and I hope y'all have a great Easter. I know that a lot of Ukrainians are preparing for this Easter. It is tomorrow. So, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Did I get that date wrong? I think he said something else rather than the 24th, didn't he?
Yeah, I think Easter has already passed.
Yeah, Easter is already passed for us, but I think for the Eastern Orthodox faith, it's actually this Sunday. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Anyways, I do thank you for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Vasily, who says, the Enforcer, has there been any news regarding activities of the Freedom Russia Legion?
We haven't actually gotten any more news on them. We did get the news for a little while, but I think that they may actually be a small unit, and so, unfortunately, we won't be able to get a lot of news on them, and I don't think they're actually being used on the front lines heavily. So I thank you very much for the support, and that's the farthest I can answer that question. And before I move on to the next one, I've just got to say this real quick, because a lot of people got stirred up about my whole war movie comment thing, and I've just got to say, I don't like things where you make very unconvincing people, and that's something that we're starting to see a lot in the modern world, kind of like how the news contorts the news into something political every single time. Movies have started to go into a direction that are really unoriginal, kind of hashed out already, and the people are unconvincing. Back in the day, movies used to focus on normal people being put in these extraordinary situations, and it was something relatable, because you could find something in these folks that related to you. You know, like if you look at Seinfeld, nobody in the, like, you know, and this isn't a war movie, this is just TV in general, but this is older TV from about 30 years back. If you look at Seinfeld, all of Seinfeld's characters, while being a little outlandish, were very relatable, and that's what made that show successful. There was nothing about any of these people that you couldn't not understand. Jerry Seinfeld was a comedian. You know, a lot of people knew comedians back then, regardless whether they were successful or not. That's another question. But, you know, all of them had, like, real-life problems, and then they would get them into weird situations. But they were situations that were kind of relatable, or if they weren't relatable, they were just funny and a little understandable and kind of fit into the character. And that's how war movies used to be, too. You know, like, if you look at The Longest Day, you know, that's not really a great war movie. Honestly, now this is probably going to piss off a lot more people, but I don't really think John Wayne was a great actor. But he was of course iconic. But if you look at The Longest Day and movies like that, they focused a lot on normal people, although John Wayne was a larger than life figure in all of his movies. If you look at A Bridge Too Far, none of the characters in that movie had to drink their own piss and stuff like that. They were normal acting people. And I feel like movies these days are forgetting that all of us are normal. We're not Supermen or anything. You know, we all have the same problems, and we all like hot showers, you know, warm food and stuff like that. And now they make characters that act like they have to, that's an affront to them, and they have to be like tougher than tough, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. People aren't like that. I haven't seen anyone like that until these movies started coming out, and then people try and imitate these like super weird people that they're trying to depict in the movies. But I thank you very much, everyone, for like having a discussion on that. Although we all are disagreeing, but I hope y'all can kind of understand where I'm coming from with that. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from IT Guy, who says, "Great job as always, guys. Pray for Ukraine and the kids, and Slava Ukraine."
Hirom Slava, and I can agree. I hope that those kids do stay safe, because it's unfortunate to see them in a terrible kind of situation like that. So I thank you so much for the support, and I hope they will stay safe. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a super chat from VMan29397, who puts in a $5 donation and says, "Do you agree with military expert Mikhail Kaufman that this offensive will be the last one Russia can launch without the use of mobilization?"
Yes, we know that they've currently lost around 10% of their combat forces, directly to combat deaths. They've lost around 20,000, 22,000 troops at this point, which is exactly 10% of their fighting force. That's not including the wounded, which are probably tens of thousands more, and so they could be around 20% to 30% depletion if they haven't been getting further reinforcements. So if this next offensive does not work and they start pouring a whole bunch of bodies into the meat grinder and they get nothing out of it, they're going to have lost so many vehicles and so many infantry that it's going to be pretty much clear that they cannot run another offensive without completely running out of the resources to do it. So they will have to start calling on the new conscripts that are probably hardly trained at all and sending them out there with no training and probably much more inferior equipment to try and continue this war that they've pretty much already lost at this point. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question, at least on what I'm thinking. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Charles Watson, who says, "What do you think the international response would be to the May 9th parade getting blown to smithereens? I've been around since day 3, and it's with many Leaf Springers. I appreciate what you guys are doing."
Well, I thank you very much for the support. It's cool to see that you've been around since day 3 and you are a member of the Leaf Spring Army. To answer your question, I think the international response to seeing something happen to the Victory Day parade on May 9th would be ecstatic at best and celebratory at worst. I think that everyone would be very happy to see something happen to the arrogant and prideful Russian government and the military when it's being displayed at its height every single year. So I hope that answers the question. That's at least how I'm kind of like filling out the room right now. I think that's how everyone would feel if the Victory Day parade had something very unfortunate happen to it. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Old Salty Squid, who says, "That bunker video of the kids tore me up. I'm impressed that you didn't break down. Your commentary after the video moved me. I shed enough tears for us both."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I can agree that the video was very moving. I make sure not to cry, because if I cry, I'm going to lose my composure, and then the whole entire stream will fall apart, and y'all are here for the news. And while I do feel terribly for those poor kids and what kind of situation they're in, I want to make sure that the news is what y'all will get, because that's what y'all are here for, and a lot of y'all use me as your only source of news. So I thank you very much for crying for both of us. Of course, I will probably cry off stream about that, because when you really sit down and think about it, that was probably the worst thing I've ever seen come out of this war yet, and I've seen a lot. So I thank you very much for the support once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Rich Hogan, who says, "Good coverage as always, and seeing the children and other civilians trapped as they are boils my blood too."
I can agree, and I thank you very much for the return support. But to answer that question as well, those poor kids, I don't think there's actually mostly kids inside of those bunkers, and I think they were brought there because that was the safest place in the city, considering that they have nuclear fallout shelters and such under that plant. But I hate to have heard those kids say that stuff, because they were sitting there saying things like, we stopped playing the games on the phone because we just want to get out and see the sun. And when you think about those poor kids being in that bunker for so long that they haven't seen the sun, and they're actually thinking about seeing it, that's terrible. Anyways, I can't really talk too much more about it because I'm actually tearing up right now. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from VMan29397, who says, "Are you aware the Caesar howitzer can deploy/relocate in a minute and fire 6 rounds in a minute? It means the Ukrainians can set up, fire, and relocate in just 3 to 4 minutes."
Yes, I did have a general idea that that's probably how that SPG works in particular. Usually the I would like to say truck mounted the truck mounted artillery pieces are usually incredibly fast in their setup, firing, and takedown kind of like speeds in a way. So I did have a general idea that it was probably much quicker than a towed artillery piece to set up, fire, and move. But I thank you very much for actually getting that figure to us, because I didn't know it was as low as 3 minutes. So I thank you once again so much for the support and sharing that information with us. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Hoodoo, Texas, who says, "Here's a poll suggestion. How many here could recognize the Ukraine flag before the invasion? I know I couldn't."
I actually could, because I actually had a friend from Ukraine. Actually, I was like a huge buff of countries around the world. I pretty much knew every single country's flag beforehand, and also their shape, where they were, and all that stuff. But I bet most people didn't, because a lot of people in daily life, they don't have to worry about where Ukraine is. That would be like worrying where Tajikistan is. And imagine how many people know where Tajikistan is. No one. So I bet you a lot of them didn't, but I surprisingly did, and of course it was because I had a Ukrainian friend before the war, and so he was, of course, always talking about how things were in Ukraine, and, kind of like his life there, and it was very interesting to hear, and I was really glad to have met him, because he was a pretty cool dude. So I thank you very much for the support. I actually will run that poll real quick, so everyone give me just a second. We're going to throw that poll up. How many of you knew the Ukrainian flag before the war? Did you wait a minute, let me go rephrase that whole entire thing. Did you know what the Ukraine flag looked like before the war? Yes or no? And then we'll ask, and we'll have that poll running. So I hope everyone votes. I would like to actually see how many of y'all actually knew what the Ukrainian flag looked like before the war. And with that, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Tan, who says, "Hello from Augusta, Georgia. Thanks again for all y'all do. It doesn't go unnoticed, and it makes a huge impact. Thanks from Tanner."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy what we're doing here on the channel. It is, of course, a lot of work. I'm actually missing out on an event that I've been looking forward to doing for years. I don't know if they're watching, but my reenacting group is currently on location somewhere else, of course, where I'm not at, and they're actually doing a French and Indian War reenactment, and I've been dying to do that for the longest time. And of course, I can't do it because I'm, caught up doing this and finals as well, because I have a final tomorrow. So thank you so much for the support. I'm glad that you do enjoy the channel, and it is a decent amount of work. So I appreciate that everyone likes this channel so much and helps me continue doing what I do. And so with that being said, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Cam Kilo, who says, "Please use it for extra pineapple on the next pizza. Please tell everyone, hit that like button. Woot woot."
Woot woot. And I thank you so much for the support, and I will put extra pineapple on that next pizza. Of course, I'm not really one to hate the pizza. It's okay. It's not great. It's not terrible. 3.6 Ronkin, but nonetheless, I do thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from KB Rugger 90, who says, "What are the challenges of getting equipment from Poland to the front line instead of stuck near Polish border?"
I think the struggle here may be the logistical chain that is crossing the border. I don't know if the West is refusing to actually drive their vehicles across the border to some kind of Ukrainian supply depot. That may be the problem. And it may be that the Ukrainians don't have enough vehicles right now, because most of them are tied up helping to supply the defending forces on the eastern side of the country, that they don't have enough to actually gather the supplies at the rate that's coming in on the western side of the country. That may be the case, but once again, that is an assumption. We don't actually have hardcore evidence to say what's going on over there either way. But anyways, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Michelle Russell, who says, this is in reference to Ukrainians looting a Russian convoy. They should take all they can to keep Russians from retrieving it for use against themselves. Slava Ukraine.
Heroam Slava. And also to answer that question, yes, that is, of course, important. Usually I think of supplies as something that you should only get if you need, and of course, you should hoard it, because even if you don't need it now, you might need it later. But I can agree that that also is another great reason to make sure to gather up the supplies, is to make sure that it does not fall back into enemy hands and can be used against you. So I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much for sharing that information with us, because that is another interesting perspective to look at the gathering of supplies from. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next, we have a $5 donation from Honest M, who says, I can't wait for the Ukrainian Farmer Tractor Parade. This war should be sponsored by John Deere.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I can agree. I think that it should be sponsored by John Deere, and the Ukrainians should have a massive farmers parade in Kyiv once the war is over, once the peace agreement has been signed. I'm not sure when that'll be anymore. It may be a while away. It may be a whole year away at this point. I'm not really sure, but we will be here reporting the news for everyone who's still interested a year from now. So I thank you very much for the support. Of course, I do agree. I think the Ukrainians should hold a farmers victory parade or a tractor parade at the end of the war. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And next question here is from Kevin Scott 76, who puts in a $5 donation and says, Borat goes to Ukraine, their new secret weapon.
Oh no, he's going to go up to the Russians and be like, so, how do you kill the Ukrainian? And they're going to explain it to him. He's going to uncover the entire thing and actually show that the Russians are committing war crimes. But I do thank you very much for the little joke there. That's a pretty funny one. And I thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from OGGE Guy 1234. And he says, for Matthew, he does a great job too. Slava Ukraine, and God bless the USA. And thank you very much for the compliment. I appreciate it. And thank you for your support of the channel as well. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next question. So the next one up is from Brooks Precision, who puts in a $5 donation and says, there is a large makeshift kennel in Lviv collecting up, feeding, and caring for stray animals. Just thought this was cool. Grab yourself some coffee.
Well, thank you very much for supporting the coffee fund. Also, I haven't noticed the Speak Break has been around. I wonder where he's been, because usually he's the one with the coffee fund. But I thank you very much for the support, and I actually have heard about that a little bit. I've heard a lot about civilians taking the initiative and making sure that all of the abandoned animals around the country, dogs, cats, and everything in between, are taken care of. And I'm very happy to hear that Ukrainians have a lot of heart in them and make sure to take care of the dogs that have been their friends for years and will be friends with them for years to come. And so I thank you so much for the support and helping us make sure that we get enough coffee. I have drank a coffee tonight, and I do every single night. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another donation from KB Rugger 90, who puts in a $5 donation and says, what are the implications of having NATO growlers escort any Ukrainian pilots flying MiGs into Ukraine? Jam radar? Maybe stop at the NATO border? ?
I'm not entirely sure. I don't really know what that would do if the Americans were flying growlers alongside the Ukrainian MiGs that were being sent into the country. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to state a little bit of ignorance on that one, because I really can't weigh in too much. So I'm sorry to say that, but I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I want to recognize a $5 donation from Vance Hicks. Thank you very much, Vance, for your support of the channel. We appreciate it very much. Next up, we have a $5 donation from Anita, who says, why do you think the Western world is oblivious to Putin's ideology of a quote-unquote Russian world?
Well, they're oblivious to the idea of a quote-unquote Russian world, just like the world was oblivious to Hitler laying out in the Mein Kampf the Lebensraum strategy, and also the autarky economic system in a way. Because in Mein Kampf, Hitler laid out, I'm just going to say at this point, because if YouTube wants to come get me, I'm using it in an educational and historical context. It's not like I'm supporting the guy or anything, but anyways, in the autarky strategy, he said, Germany cannot survive without land. They're going to overpopulate the country, and because of that, Germany will go into a decline, an economic decline. There will be famines, economic strife, and so on, just like in the Great Depression, where the Nazis pretty much started to take off. And so he said, we need to expand eastwards. There's a whole bunch of land out here and a whole bunch of meaningless people who live there. And so if we take this land, we can kill off most of them, subjugate the rest of them as slaves, and make them work the land and feed the Germans, and also give the Germans a lot of room to expand outwards. And so so Hitler laid that out clearly in the book Mein Kampf well before the war started, and then Germany started to actually take the initiative and start laying out this strategy. He started to unite all the German-speaking people, the Austrians, the Sudetenland, and the rest of the Czech Republic, and the rest of it. And no one sat there and thought, "Wow, he's actually doing exactly what he wrote out in that book." Like no one paid attention to it, just like we are now. And so I hope that answers the question. That's why the Western world's oblivious to it, is just like every other time historically where it's been clearly spelled out. We're oblivious to it again. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that gives a bit of historical context as to it's been pretty much ignored before. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a super chat from Gizmo, who puts in a $6 donation and says, joining from Ireland, I have signed up to the Irish Reserves, looking to help if and when I can. I want to fight. I regret not joining the military younger.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope you do have a fun time in the Irish Reserve. Hopefully, you're not joining the IRA, because that would be another story. But I hope you do have a very good time. And also, that was a joke, by the way. Don't take that seriously. But I hope that you will serve in the Irish Army, the Irish Reserves, very well. I don't really know the actual condition of the Irish Army. I think you'll have an incredibly small one, to the point that you'll only have a few dozen artillery pieces, towed artillery pieces, and that's your entire artillery corps. But nonetheless, I do hope that if you do need to be called upon, that you will serve incredibly well, and I wish you the best of luck. And I thank you so much for taking the initiative upon yourself to try and help out any way you can. And with that being said, thank you so much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Diffuse56, who says, I heard a Euronews anchor say today that there was an effort to resupply Mariupol by helicopter. She then said no, more about it, just rumor,
I'm not really sure if any sort of stories about resupplying Mariupol are true. We don't really know, I don't really know of any way that they could effectively and safely make sure that the resupplying force would survive and arrive there with supplies to give to the Azov in the first place. So I'm not really sure if what she was saying was true, and then they told her, no, backtrack because you're giving it away, and then she backtracked. I'm not really sure. But then again, I think that the Ukrainians would keep that kind of operation secret until it actually took place and succeeded, and then they would tell everyone that they had managed to do it. But I thank you very much for the support. That's kind of what I'm thinking on that issue right now. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question. But before we do, how many super chats do we have left?
We have about 5 left.
All right. And with that, on to the next question.
And next up, I want to recognize a $5 donation from Girls Rock 47. Thank you very much for your support to the channel. Up next, we have a $5 donation from BSG Wolf, who says maybe the next fundraiser could be to help support the dogs, cats, and other pets in Ukraine.
I have been thinking about that, and I think that is something that we'll probably do in the next fundraiser, if I can find a organization on GuideStar that is currently doing that does have a verified and validified EIN number for me to use. I have been thinking about that, and I think that's probably what the next fundraiser will be tomorrow. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Hawk's Eye View, who says, are the Ukrainians going to be selling Russian tanks and other equipment this summer at the local farmers markets this summer?
I do believe they will. We know that they have a really large amount of them. Of course, they were tax-free, and so all the profits that they'll make off of it are not taxable. So I do think that we'll probably see a couple of homegrown T-80s, free-range T-80s, most likely organic, that are being sold at the farmers market. So I like the joke, and I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that weighs in on the joke a little bit and adds to it. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from James Morris, who puts in a $4 donation and says, for the record, the soldiers yesterday with the Soviet flag badge are the Spetsnaz. The red O is for where to shoot. not concerned as they're poorly led.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I do thank you for telling us that they are a Spetsnaz, although I have never seen that identifier before, and we have seen other so-called elite troops like the VDV. But I do thank you very much once again for the info, and once again for the joke as well about what the red O is for. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $2 donation from Ann Towner, who says 325 questions. LOL.
Say what again?
They say 325 questions. LOL.
I don't think we get that many questions ever, but I do thank you very much for the support, and I think you're actually making a joke about if I can, like, run all the way back to this and actually get it right. When I was talking about the guy who thought I said I was going to be answering 35 questions per segment. Oh, no, not at all. It's 3 to 5, and then at the end of the stream, we answer everyone else's questions that are left. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever get up to 325, and if we did, I think I would be sitting in this chair and I would just turn into bones by the time I got to the end of the question segment. But I thank you very much for the support and the little joke there. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And last super chat of the night goes to Jonathan White, who says Odessa to Crimea were under Roman rule.
Excuse me, I did actually know that. And there actually was a little bit of Greek colonies, I believe, that actually cropped up somewhere on Crimea and also near Odessa as well. Also, I believe the largest Roman bridge was somewhere in Romania, if I'm correct. It was on the Danube River, I believe, if I am correct. Yes, the Danube River, and I believe it was about a mile long. And it doesn't exist to this day, but you can actually see the carving out of the rock walls that were on the sides of this river where this massive bridge once was. And I think that is a huge testament, although I'm not one for the ancient history, it is a huge testament to the ability and the engineering prowess of the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic as a whole. But they reached out that far when they became an empire, not a republic. But I thank you very much for the support. And I do thank you very much for sharing that info. It is in fact true. The Romans had a far-reaching empire that expanded all the way to the Picts up here at the top of England. I believe that this border is actually still... Well, actually, let's go look at that on Google Maps. United Kingdom. Let's go find Hadrian's Wall and see if it still is on that border in between England and Scotland. So let me just exit out that. Put it on layers. We want layers. Okay, so actually it looks like it's on the little water, but I feel that this thing is still based around Hadrian's Wall. Are you kidding me? Is it not? That's like the most disappointing thing. Wow. For some reason I thought that the Hadrian's Wall still defined the border. Wait a minute. Pennine Way. It's the wall right there. I can't tell. Let's just type in Hadrian's Wall and see if we can find Hadrian's Wall. And this will show us where it is, I'm assuming. So there's a part of the fort, a part of one of the forts that was on Hadrian's Wall. They used as an outpost on it. Well, how far is that from the England? Oh, that's actually a pretty decent ways away. So there's a river. There's a little fort. And then we have the Hadrian Wall path. And we can actually see part of the wall here. And also part of the wall here. So actually, wow, this is insane. You can actually see that they marked a decent amount of the turrets on Hadrian's Wall as well, like right here. Wow, that's wild. But actually, it's not that close to the Scottish border, actually. It's actually a pretty decent ways away, which I'm actually shocked by. For this entire time, my entire life, I thought that Hadrian's Wall was actually the border for Scotland and England. But actually, it's miles behind, more towards Newcastle and Carlisle. But anyways, I thank you very much for the support and also sharing the information about the Romans. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the questions from the live chat since we have answered all of the super chats for tonight.
And for our first live chat question here, we have from Woody Stems, who says, can low-yield nukes be smaller than Hiroshima?
Yes, they can. We know that a lot of the tactical nukes are smaller than Hiroshima bombs. So yes, the answer to that is a simple yeah. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, one of our fans here, George Saucington, has been putting us some pretty good questions, so I have two of them from him. His first one says, Enforcer, do you personally believe that military conflict between NATO and Russia is inevitable? Should we be preparing for full-scale war? And do you think it would be realistically eventually go nuclear?
I do believe that it would go nuclear, of course, in the future if the Russians started to lose heavily. But to answer the rest of that question, I do think it's inevitable that we will be drawn into this war. Of course, just like in World War II, we think right now, if we don't do anything, the war could pass by and it could be really small. It's not going to be. Russia's intentions have already made it clear that they're going to also try and take the Baltic states and parts of Poland, which comes into our sphere of influence, which is just like how the Germans said, we're going to take everything over here. And then they took Czechoslovakia and Austria. And then everyone in the West said, well, I think they'll stop there. I think they won't go for Poland. And then they went for Poland, which directly expanded into their sphere of influence. So I do believe that war is inevitable. And I do think that it will, of course, go nuclear when the war does become inevitable. Hopefully it wouldn't, but that's what I'm leaning towards. To both of those answers, that's what I'm thinking. So I hope that answers that question, and I thank you very much for asking him, Saucy. That's actually a pretty neat name as well. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, I have another question from the same person. He says, Enforcer, have you heard anything about the alleged Russian chemical weapons attack in Mariupol? I feel like that was news for a day and everyone forgot about it.
Could you say that one more time, Matthew?
He said, have you heard anything about the alleged Russian chemical weapons attack in Mariupol?
Okay, yes, I did. No one was able to confirm it. Zelensky even said, I don't know if that happened. Because, and you know, Zelensky would be the guy who would say, yes, it did happen, because he's looking for any way for Ukraine to get that extra bit of support. And even he was said, there's really no proof. And I said it when it occurred. I said there was reports that there was a chemical attack, but there has been no verification of it. And from what I can tell, that still remains the case, and that's why we haven't really heard a lot more news about it. And also, this poll has been up for a really long time, and so we're going to revisit the poll, and I'm also going to run another one because I saw someone else bring up something interesting. And I said, do y'all know what the Ukraine flag looked like before the war? And 53% of y'all said yes, and 40% of y'all said no. So that's actually an incredibly narrow margin. And I didn't actually think it would be that close. I thought most of y'all would say, yeah, you'd seen the flag before. But with that, we're going to run another poll, because someone said, run a poll to see how many viewers are Enforcer fans. And we're going to ask that. I think most of y'all here at this question segment are probably fans, because no one's going to hang around that long through the question segment. But anyways, how are you an Enforcer fan? Yes or no? And we're going to ask that question. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a question from Jim Bob Jones, who says, Enforcer, why is the Kerch Bridge in Crimea still standing?
The Kerch Bridge is probably standing because the Ukrainians don't have the ability to reach out and smack the thing to pieces. I know that the Ukrainians, of course, with their minds being incredibly focused on logistics. Now, if you were to say the Ukrainians had Asperger's and what they were focusing on the most, I actually think I have Asperger's, so don't take that offensively if you do have it. But anyways, if you were to say that the Ukrainians had Asperger's syndrome and they were focusing on something to an unholy degree, it's on logistics. And so you know that the Ukrainians have been troughing over this bridge for ever since the start of the war. And if they ever get the ability to actually pinpoint hit this bridge and knock out both sides of it that are over water, they will definitely go for it. So I thank you very much for the question, and I do know that if the Ukrainians ever get the ability to reach out and hit that thing, they will. So I hope that answers the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Eric Higdon, who says, do you know if the reports of Ukrainian Special Forces, or excuse me, UK Special Forces being sent into Ukraine as combat troops is true?
I do not know if it's true. Of course, if they were ever found out to be there and it was a true story, that would entail NATO being directly tied into the war, which would make the Russians probably just start an all-out war with the West. Whether that would go to their benefit or not, it definitely wouldn't. But they would still start the war anyways, and then we would be on the road to nuclear annihilation probably within the next few weeks or months afterwards. So I don't think that's true, and I don't think the West is wanting to play it that dangerous and getting that close to war. But I do thank you very much for the question, and I hope I've answered it at least on my opinion. So with that, we're going to move on to about 2 to 3 more questions, and then we're going to end the stream. And so with that, what do we got?
All right, so up next we have a question from Liberty, not License, who says, my question is, how many oligarchs are there, and how many of them and their families will Putin assassinate before year's end?
Unfortunately, I don't really think I can answer that question too well. I don't really know a lot about the oligarchs. I don't really know how many of them there are, and I think I've only heard about one of them and their family being killed. So I really can't answer that question, sadly, so I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that one. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think we're having a glitch there for a second. But anyways, our next question is from Michael, and he says, Enforcer, can the Ukrainians hold both fronts effectively, or will they have to redirect some troops from one front to the other? If so, will that put one of the fronts in jeopardy?
I believe you may be talking at this point about the Eastern Front here from Kharkiv to Severodonetsk, and then from Severodonetsk to Kherson. They won't really have to shift around forces too much. It's really just one large continuous front line in the shape of a crescent, and most of the front line over here is actually on the Dnieper River, so there's not really that much of a land front line. Actually, we could probably measure it out. So let's see if we can. Let's see if this little ruler thing will do its job. Okay, we got the first one. Okay, we got the second one. The next one. Next one. Hang on, everyone. I want to make sure I get an answer to this. And also, it's going to be a little bit longer because we're not perfectly measuring out. We're putting it to the side of the red line just a little bit. So we're going to try and just cut through that and represent the actual land front line here, there, because most of that's on a river, so they're not actually fighting on that. We're going to move on down there and then there. Sorry if I'm zooming in and out really weird. I'm just trying to make sure I can measure this right. Now we're down to Donetsk. We're going to pass Marinka. We're now at 330 miles of front line. Now we're going to go to Volnovakha and then around and then further on down. We've now gotten to 430 and we just got to Tokmak where there's still been fighting. We're now going to make it here. And so they have 468 miles of uninterrupted front line from Kharkiv to Zaporizhia, or Zaporizhia, however that's pronounced. And then down here, they probably have an additional 30 to 40 miles of front line that they're actually sharing with each other. So to answer that question, I think that they won't really have to shift around a lot because they'll have several 100,000 troops on a front line that's only around 400 miles in length, a little over that. So I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And that was actually the last question I had in the spreadsheet for the night.
All right, well, let me go through the live chat here, and I'm going to answer maybe one more question. So, let's see. There it is. Neil McKee said, "Who is Enforcer? You don't know me? Come on, man. You ought to know me." But anyways, I'm the Enforcer. You know, I cover the news on Ukraine. That's what I do. But let's see. Let me go try and find a question with that Enforcer on it. Ken said, let's see. Ken said, let's see. The Doughboy says, I'm a fan. Thanks to the Enforcer for providing this daily information. I'm sure it's quite a task to do this video daily while dealing with life. Best wishes from the Midwest. Slava Ukraini. And Herom Slava. And yes, it does take a lot. This stream in total, along with running it, usually takes around 7 hours a day. And on top of yesterday's stream, which became a marathon of 4 hours, that really took, like 8 or 9 hours yesterday. And then we're going to answer one more. The Enforcer fan asked for a poll. Unfortunately, the stream's going to end, so I don't think there's enough time to do a poll. And so we're going to go up a little bit more. At the Enforcer, Asperger's is now a dated diagnosis. It's all autism spectrum now. Interesting. I didn't know that. The Enforcer, given the news, Kaliningrad want to vote to leave Russia. Should NATO launch an occupation of Belarus and secure Ukraine's flanks? Nah. I mean, like, you know, NATO is trying to do mostly defensive strategies right now, and that would become offensive, which is kind of against their interest right now. And so with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream, and we've answered all the questions we can, and I'm afraid we've run out of time. So I hope y'all all have enjoyed tonight's stream and gotten a lot of news out of it. We will have a working map tomorrow, most likely, and I'm also going to try and work on uploading the little snippets of news tomorrow as well, if I have the time, so that way we can get some more videos out there and y'all can see some of the news coming out in the middle of the day instead of having to wait all the way into the night to see something. So I thank you all very much once again for watching. I hope y'all did enjoy, and I thank everyone so much for the support who did send in a super chat. It helps us run this channel, and it means a lot to me because it helps me not worry about the future. So I thank you all once again. And with that, I wish you all a good night, and I'll see you all tomorrow on Sunday's fundraiser. So thank you once again, and good night.